Southern Arkansas, 1861. With the prospect of civil war on the horizon, the citizens of Bradley County prepare to make the biggest decision of their lifetime. Will they stand with the young, turbulent nation formed less than 100 years ago? Or will they claim separation and fling themselves and their families' lives and property into limbo? In about 2 months after the secession of South Carolina and 6 other southern states, Arkansas would take the plunge and join the Confederacy. Unbeknownst to many citizens in Bradley County and around the rest of the South, a major problem was brewing even further south. A problem which held big economic implications on the United States and its future. In 1861, Benito Juarez, a Zapotec Amerindian who served 5 terms as President of Mexico, made the executive decision to stop interest payments to many countries that Mexico borrowed from. One nation in particular that did not take the news of Mexico's financial woes very well was France. Over the past 100 years, the French had been involved in several major wars, including the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Money was tight for the French. By loaning cash to the Mexicans, the French were guaranteed payment back with interest. But when Mexico was unable to repay the loan, the French decided to force the payment. Instead of just merely threatening Mexico into paying the loan back, the French took the bold step of an attempt at occupation. In early 1862, French forces successfully invaded Mexico. It seemed as though the French army would be able to just tap the Mexican forces on the shoulder, and they would step aside. The French were soon to be in for a rude awakening. Led by General Charles de Laurencis, the French army aimed its march for the heart of Mexico, Mexico City. Leading over 6,000 soldiers through the region, General Laurencis had an air of confidence about him. Why should he not? After all, he was leading a group of finely trained French infantry on a quest to dominate a nation of deal-breakers that had no army seemingly capable of standing up to the brave Frenchmen he marched with. In early May, with French forces quickly making their way to the capital, political negotiations began. Mexican officials saw the writing on the wall and made a last-ditch attempt to remove the French army without a major battle having to take place. As Mexican officials worked to put an end to the French march, General de Laurencis' troops took position just outside of the town of Puebla. The French army camped there and somewhat intimidated the Mexican citizens of Puebla. The Frenchmen were wandering around the camp in plain sight with rifles and cannons both loaded and ready for battle. The natives of Puebla saw this as the beginning of the end of their precious village. And to top things off, political negotiations were breaking down. What would happen next? A group of Puebla citizens filed a complaint with the French commander. He took this as a plight to tear into his forces with a surprise. Before this event, General de Laurencis had been preparing to remove his forces to the coast. But now that negotiations looked to be faltering and Puebla citizens seemed to be trying to push him around, the general took the option of occupying a small town called Orizaba and the landing port of Veracruz. General Laurencis was under the impression that most of the citizens of Puebla were friendly to the French. They had only been annexed by the Mexican government in 1860 during the Wars of Reform. To the north of Puebla sat 2 separate forts, Fort Laredo and Fort Guadalupe. Both forts sat on opposite hilltops. A Mexican garrison of 4,500 soldiers, mostly veterans of the Reform Wars, occupied Fort Laredo. Thinking the Puebla citizens were friendly to his forces, General Laurencis assumed that once his army began to attack the Mexican garrison, that the Puebla citizens would rebel and help take the fort. He was wrong. For the first time in Mexican history, a united Mexican army would stand toe-to-toe with one of the world's most powerful armies. On May 5, 1862, against all advice from his leading men, General Laurentis ordered the attack to begin. By 3 p.m., his artillery division was completely out of ammunition. 2 waves of French infantry had been totally decimated by Mexican forces, which put up a strong defense. And not to mention a monsoon rain had started to pour down on the battlefield, making the land a difficult terrain to move in. The French had been stunned. General Laurentis had not paid any attention to history. Just as in the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, in which the English had besieged and captured the French town of Harfleur with a smaller outgunned force due to terrible weather conditions and bad decision-making, the French had once again walked into a trap. This time they would not escape. In total, Mexican forces suffered 83 dead and 131 wounded, a small amount compared to the French. 462 Frenchmen lie dead on the battlefield at the end of the day, and over 300 were wounded. Although the loss of Puebla slowed down the French invasion of Mexico, the French eventually, and at a high cost, were able to take Mexico City and created the Second Mexican Empire. Austrian Archduke Maximilian would be put into the position of ruler of the empire, but that empire would not last long. Several nations, mainly led by the United States, viewed Emperor Maximilian as a French puppet and did not regard him as a legitimate leader of Mexico. After the Civil War was over in the United States, men such as Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, along with many other U.S. citizens, found themselves at odds with the French-led Mexican government. Although many Mexican citizens were somewhat loyal to Maximilian, he was publicly executed in 1867 near Querétaro. On September 16, 1862, Mexican President Juarez declared that the 5th of May, the anniversary of the important Battle of Puebla, would be a national holiday, today known as Cinco de Mayo. Though not known as Mexico's Independence Day, which is September 16th, Cinco de Mayo marks what is known as the single most important victory ever for the Mexican people. Facing a much larger force with more firepower, the Mexican army was able to deal the French a huge blow. In the eyes of United States citizens today, Cinco de Mayo may not seem to be very important, but it is. The Battle of Puebla marks the last time any foreign nation has ever formally invaded any country in the Americas. Today, Cinco de Mayo is used to celebrate the life and culture of Americans of Mexican ancestry. Much like St. Patrick's Day is used to celebrate those of Irish descent, Cinco de Mayo is another day in which we as United States citizens can celebrate our rich diversity and acceptance of all people. We are not merely one race or one culture. Like a beautiful painting, one color does not get the job done. It takes many shades of the color wheel to make a Picasso what a Picasso is.
Cinco de Mayo, that is May 5th. It is the most important Mexican holiday, right? Wrong! Here is 5 interesting facts about Cinco de Mayo that you probably didn't know. Number 5. The date is observed in the United States as a celebration of Mexican heritage and pride. In Mexico, however, the holiday only gets some limited recognition. Number 4. May 5th is the anniversary of the Mexican Army's unlikely victory over French forces at the Battle of Puebla in 1862. Number 3. Although Mexico won that battle in the city of Puebla, the French were able to capture Mexico City and establish Emperor Maximilian I as ruler of Mexico. 3 years later, the French were expelled and Maximilian was executed. Number 2. According to Time magazine, Cinco de Mayo came into vogue in 1940s America during the rise of the Chicano movement. Number 1. Cinco de Mayo is now celebrated worldwide. For example, a skydiving club near Vancouver, Canada, holds a Cinco de Mayo skydiving event. And in the Cayman Islands, in the Caribbean, there is an annual Cinco de Mayo air guitar competition. Find more cool trivia at Fact Extract.